Good morning, everyone, once again. So thank you so much for making time today for the Silverfort webinar. My name is Sami Luvinzu. I'm part of the Data Group IT team based in Kenya. I have many members of the team on the call as well. And we have the honor of having our vendor, that's Silverfort. So you'll get to hear more about the solution. Maybe just to tell you a bit about who we are as Data Group IT. So just to mention, I'm the Silverfort product manager in Kenya, and we have other similar team members across the region. So you can be able to reach out to the respective team if you need more information. So Data Group IT is what you call a value added distributor. So we believe in adding value to our clients as well as our partners like Silverfort. So we have various areas that we focus on in terms of offering security solutions, and we like to categorize them in these 6 pillars. So we have a way in which we're able to ensure that we cover all areas of security that you need as a business, whether you're a bank, an insurance company, a non-profit, whichever line of business you are in. These are areas of security that will be extremely important to cover. One is data security, where we look at how do you secure the data that you use in your business. So there's the aspect of looking at the actual storage of data and what's happening in that data, being able to monitor, to analyze what's happening, who is accessing the data, what modifications are being done on the data, to look at aspects of privacy and data control. We have tools that will help you with that. Now, the data itself, it's also important to secure it through backups. So we also have solutions that can be able to help you with backup and recovery. And they're designed in such a way that the backup and recovery is seamless and also very, very flexible. You can be able to have heterogeneous data sources and destinations, and you can be able to have seamless backup between on-prem and cloud as well. We also have the area of encryption, which is another way we can secure data. How do you effectively encrypt your data, encrypt in real time, encrypt at rest, be able to ensure the best encryption algorithms are applied, and most importantly, that the key management is being done properly. So all this is also works very well when you have a way to monitor security information when it comes to the events, security events that happen across different tools, different environments. So there are also area of SIM, looking at how do you manage security information and have it in such a way that that information adds value. Now, this data usually travels through networks. So how do we make sure these networks, number one, are secure, and number two, are actually reliable? So in terms of access to these networks that lead to your data, we have solutions that can help with network access control. So you can be able to control that entry point to make sure everything is authenticated and authorized properly before there's access to that network. Then on these networks, there are all these controls that we put in place to be able to determine who gets access to what. It's typically on firewalls. But then there's also a need to be able to control those policies and monitor them, make sure they're done properly. So we also have tools that can be able to help you manage network security policies and automating that process without compromising security. And then also on the same network, there's typically a lot of activity, a lot of users, a lot of devices, and it's very difficult to identify malicious behavior when you have a large network with different users, different applications, different behaviors of users. So now it's important now to use things like artificial intelligence to identify patterns and anomalies out of those patterns so that you're able to identify risks within the network without you having to manually write rules to look for them. So in the area of network detection and response, we have a leading solution that's able to use artificial intelligence to identify risks within the network. On the same breath, on the firewalls that I mentioned earlier, we also have now a modern firewall solution that can be able to cover all the controls you need on the network, both on-prem and cloud, and using the globally leading technologies to ensure that access. But even as you have more services being published online, DDoS mitigation becomes a very important network security tool. So we have a solution that can help prevent DDoS attacks against any application that you have that is available to the public for your business. Now that I mentioned applications, we also have ability to now control application security, being able to secure apps or applications that you published online. So we're able to ensure that as people interact with your money makers online, you're able to ensure that you filter out malicious users who want to take away your money. Yeah, so the WAF, Web Application Firewall, is an essential tool, which we have the leading WAF in our portfolio. We also have the area of testing those applications. So before you even publish, you have to ensure that you test them thoroughly. So we have tools that help in that process. And in a similar way, on enterprise email, we have solutions that can help secure your email access. And you know, email is a leading entry point into your network in terms of compromise. So most compromise in your network starts on email. So it's important that you have a good solution there. And also, generally in your data, we have a tool that can help with data loss prevention to ensure that sensitive data doesn't leave your network. And now, maybe more on the focus of this webinar, which is around user security. How do you manage privilege access in your network? How do you manage How do you manage identities in your network? That's what you're going to focus on right now. How do you have unified security in across your environment in the area of users? So that's what we'll focus on. We have tools that complement this area of security, things like endpoint detection and response, which secures the system where the user has logged into. We have the area of authentication, where Silverfort also will play a major role that you will see in this presentation on this webinar. And then also in the area of cloud, as Data Group IT, we also have tools that help with securing cloud, things like the access brokers and the secure web gateways and so on. And on the mobile side, we also have tools to control these mobile devices that often become a point of risk and a point of exposure in the network. So that's talking about what we do at a high level. And then now maybe getting to the meat of the matter. Um, today we're focusing on one solution that is a bit new to the African market, but it's a very good solution when it comes to identity security. And they take a unique approach when it comes to securing identities, and they're able to cover a gap that traditionally was left uncovered. So I don't want to spoil, don't want to be a spoiler. So I'll hand it over to the Silverfort team, just explain their story and why this solution is very relevant for you. So we have two gentlemen that we'll be interacting with today. One is called Egbert. So Egbert has been in Africa for the longest time, meaning moving across the continent. And he's the sales manager for Africa when it comes to Silverfort. And he's quite excited to be able to bring this solution to you and be able to explain how it can be able to add value to you. With him is Offer. So Offer is the pre-sales engineer who works with Egbert across Africa. So it's going to be quite an interesting session. Please put any questions that you may have on the chat, and we'll be very eager to be able to answer you. And also, if you have interest in further conversations, we'll share contacts of whoever is presenting today, as well as the team that invited you. You can be able to reach out to them as well, our team across the region. So be very happy to work with you on the journey of improving security for your identities across your infrastructure. So let me hand it over to the Silverfort team and you'll be able to proceed.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Sammy, and thank you for that introduction. As Sammy mentioned, my name is Egbert. I'm actually based out of Joburg when I'm not on the plane. So I have visited most of the territories, the people on this call, and I'm very excited to talk to you about Silverfort. So as Sammy mentioned, Silverfort might be a new name to you. You might not be aware of us. And the reason for that is we, as Silverfort, only decided to enter Africa about a year ago. So I joined Silverfort from a company called Imperva in February. And yeah, we're busy taking Silverfort to the market. So the format today is I'm going to do a short presentation that's just going to explain what we do, what is Silverfort, and crucially, I'm going to talk about what problems we see in the organizations we interact with. So what do we solve? And that will then be followed by a demonstration by my colleague Offer, where you can actually see what it looks like and hopefully get a good understanding of what we do. And as Sammy mentioned, you will be able to reach out to us afterwards to have further discussions. So there's a number of challenges in identity security, and I'm going to touch on 3 specific ones today that we encounter in a lot of organizations. And my ask of you is, as I go through these challenges, if there's something you see and you think, oh, this is something I'm struggling with in my environment, feel free to put questions into the Q&A session. We'll cover all of the questions after the demonstration. And then obviously we can interact. Now, if somebody were to ask me, give me a one line of what Silverfort does, it is quite simply, we're an identity firewall. So similar to where you will have network firewalls that protects your network layer, we're a firewall, but specifically focused on identity. And when we talk about digital identities, it's very important that we differentiate between human identities and non-human identities, because both of them have threats to environments, but the method of protecting the different human versus non-human identities differs significantly. And we'll talk to how Silverfort solves for both human and non-human identities. Now, we are a unified identity platform, meaning we do integrate to a number of identity providers. So especially in bigger organizations, you might find that they're running Active Directory. They might have invested in the cloud, so they might have Entra ID in the cloud. They might have Okta. They might have Ping. And that's probably the main reason why Silverfort started. We recognize that a lot of organizations run multiple identity management platforms, but none of them are talking to each other. So as the slide said previously that Sammy showed, we are a unified identity security platform in that we do integrate between different identity platforms. But what I want to specifically focus on today is Active Directory. And simply because probably 95% of our customer base have a problem around Active Directory, and we solve for those problems in Active Directory. So we know that Active Directory has been around for a quarter of a century, and a lot of organizations, there's a lot of history in that Active Directory, a lot of undocumented identities, and generally people do not have real-time visibility into Active Directory. Now, we have partnered with a number of insurance houses around the house because of where we focus. Obviously, like a lot of security vendors, we're all about incident prevention, giving people visibility. And some of the stats shared by those insurance houses is 90% of cyber incidents investigated involved Active Directory. Why? Because simply that is the access into your environment. But we then conversely know that introducing MFA, and a lot of organizations are running MFA, reduces the potential for a compromise by just about 100%, 99.9%. And then a lot of companies, a lot of you on this call already have MFA. So the question is, why do breaches still take place? Why do you still have compromised credential? And that's all around the blind spots that come with Active Directory. And I'm going to talk specifically around 3 primary blind spots that people have in Active Directory where we can play a role. And then, as I mentioned, Offer will actually demonstrate this. So the identity security blind spots, a lot of organizations have, starts off with they have MFA. In some instances, they might actually have more than one MFA. But the challenge is it doesn't cover everything in the environment. And specifically, it does not cover legacy applications. So if we say legacy applications, what do we mean? We're talking about things like command line tools, file shares, workbenches, DBA workbenches, your vCenter administration console, your network devices, anything old sitting in your environment that's been around for years, you're probably going to have a challenge getting MFA there. So even though MFA is a proven technology that can help you reduce the risk of a breach or incidents, the problem is it does not extend everywhere. And that's why some organizations run more than one MFA, because they'll, for instance, have MS Authenticator that works well in the cloud. So the Office 365 is well contained and managed by MFA. But on-prem for their network devices, they might have a different MFA because MS Authenticator does not work there. And then they still don't have coverage of everything. So in the demonstration today, we'll show you how we can take whatever MFA you're currently using and extend it to cover these legacy systems. So command line tools, file shares, network devices, administration consoles, and we can do it on a very granular level that Offer will demonstrate. The second problem relates to service accounts. Remember, we talked about human and non-human identities. So obviously for human identities, MFA is a very good solution if you want to introduce a zero trust methodology around your identities. However, you cannot use MFA for service accounts for obvious reasons. There's no human interaction there. So how do you approach service accounts? So a lot of organizations over the years have introduced PAM into their environment, so privilege access management, which is also a very good tool that solves for a lot of problems around service accounts in terms of it's going to give you visibility of what people are doing. Crucially, it's going to give you password rotation, which, from a compliance perspective is a best practice. But what we also know with PAM is it's not an easy implementation. It can be quite strenuous. There's point integration that needs to take place. And often we talk to organizations that are running PAM, they're happy with PAM, but there are identities that for whatever reason they do not have in PAM. So a very good example, and I come across it quite a lot talking to customers across Africa, they might have legacy service accounts where password rotation is not possible because it's been there for a long time, it's undocumented. Somebody put a password or credentials in a script, and as soon as you rotate the password, then you break something in the environment, you break systems. So what do you do if you have service accounts that's not included in your PAM, where you, for instance, cannot do password rotation? And then visibility. A lot of people really struggle to get visibility into service accounts. So I've got a couple of projects where we actually being bundled as part of the PAM project because we give that real-time visibility into what service accounts are doing in your environment. So when you start us up, we've got behavior analytics that will automatically identify your service accounts. It will classify them, so it will tell you who's logging onto that service account, where are they logging onto, what protocol is being used, and this happens automatically without you telling us what is happening in your server in your Active Directory. And when Offer does the demonstration, he's also going to talk to the architecture and how we're able to very easily provide that visibility for customers. Then the third blind spot, and as I mentioned, just keep in mind, if you see anything here that you think this is relevant to my environment, feel free to pop some questions in the Q&A, or alternatively, we can always have discussions afterwards. The third problem is only going to be relevant for people that have a privileged access management system implemented. So we're talking about things like Beyond Trust, CyberArk, and so on. So what often happens in those environments, and typically in bigger environments, is sometimes system administrators find ways to bypass PAM. So that immediately nullifies the value of PAM because, more often than not, PAM is in the environment because it's regulatory or a compliance requirement. And if people bypass PAM, you can't see what they're doing. And over the last couple of months, I've spoken to two big banks that actually have this problem where people are bypassing PAM. And it's not an easy problem to solve. So some people do it on the network layer, but it's cumbersome and it's very difficult. We have the ability to basically dictate the route that system administrators take in the environment. So we can put a firewall. Remember, we're an identity firewall. We can put an identity firewall in place that prevents people from bypassing PAM. And it's literally a 5-minute exercise. So if you're running PAM, you're having challenges with people bypassing PAM. A lot of times people know it's happening, but they have no way of stopping it. We can offer a very, very easy and quick solution to prevent that from happening. So as we continue, keep in mind, this is the 3 major blind spots we solve for hundreds of customers worldwide. And we can help you if you have a challenge like that. Just a little more on the statistics around why what we do is very important. This gives us a list of all the favorite tools that hackers like to use. So bad actors that maybe gets credentials and get into your environment. These are their favorite tools to basically exploit your environment. And then the color actually indicates here which ones, the orange color indicates which one is impossible to MFA. And you can see the most popular one, PowerShell, that is used most often by bad actors, is impossible to MFA until now. So with Silverfort, all of these orange bands you see, so the PowerShell, PSExec, net.exe, etc., we can very easily extend MFA. And critically, a lot of people think that we're an MFA provider, and that's not true. We will take whatever MFA you use in your environment and extend it to cover the list of tools on this slide. And importantly, we do it very quickly. And as offer go through the architecture, you'll understand why we can do this very quickly. We've got a very non-intrusive architecture that means that you can literally deploy us within a day, and within weeks, you can solve for the problems I just covered in the previous slide. You compared it to, for instance, a privileged access management implementation. You're in for months, if not years. We can literally, within weeks, deliver value, give you visibility, and protect your digital identities, both human and non-human. Very importantly, just want to revisit service accounts. Service accounts remain a problem. Even organizations running PAM still have challenges around service account. And more often than not, it boils down to visibility. And then, as I mentioned, often there's service accounts that you cannot get into PAM for some reason. I met with a bank in Nigeria a couple of weeks ago. I did a trip to West Africa where, for whatever reason, we didn't drill into that, but in this specific environment, they don't have any of their service accounts implemented in PAM, only the human identities. So they've got a huge blind spot around service accounts. They don't know what's happening there, and they have no protection. So just keep in mind, with Silverfort, we will give you the real-time visibility of what's happening in your service accounts, and we can protect it. And you can see we actually paid a third party, I think it was last year, or it might have been late 2023, 2022, to do analysis of 650 companies where they asked them how confident are they in their identity management, and specifically how confident are they can detect service account abuse and prevent it. And only 20% of the companies, so 20% of that 650 companies that were interviewed, said they're comfortable, they have visibility, and they can detect and act against malicious service account access. So it is a problem for a lot of organizations. So sometimes, people kind of develop a false sense of, I'm in a good space, I'm protected, I've got a web application firewall, I have VPN, I have PAM, but in reality, anybody running Active Directory are going to have these legacy tools like command line, file shares, they're going to have service accounts. That means that they are exposed, and that is what we solve for. And hopefully, as we go through the demonstration, you'll get a better sense of how we can do that. So just coming back to our value, and this is probably the biggest value we provide to our customers, is we have a very short implementation time. And as offer goes through the actual architecture, you'll understand why. So with PAM, you have to do the implementation. There's going to be point-to-point integration and so on. And even once the solution is implemented, you have to go through user adoption. And we know how difficult it is sometimes to manage change in an environment. We live behind the scenes, so users don't even know Silverfort is deployed, so you don't need to worry about user adoption. And we deploy within a day, we can be up and running. We'll start your service account discovery, classification, and we will immediately be able to extend MFA to those areas where previously it was impossible to get MFA. As discussed, Active Directory remains the number one target, simply because it's been around for a long time and there's no viable alternative. And it becomes more complicated. A lot of bigger enterprises have adopted cloud infrastructure, and more often than not, they may be running Entra ID, which is kind of AD for Azure. And now they've got two places where they're running Active Directory. So they've got on-prem Active Directory with identities, they've got Entra ID with identities, and the two are not talking with each other. And we can actually, from a Silverfort perspective, integrate your on-prem Active Directory with your Entra ID in the cloud, give you a single pane of glass to see what is happening with those identities, and then to centrally manage your second factor authentication, your service accounts. And once again, hopefully that will become very apparent in the demonstration. It's not only about security for us as well. There's a lot of regulations that we help customers, achieve. So things like PCI, some of them not necessarily relevant to Africa, but we do provide visibility. We do provide the ability to do reporting. From a compliance perspective, you have total access to all of the logs around your identities to see what they're doing. So very useful from a forensic investigation. And then in certain regions, a lot of organizations actually take cyber insurance with the likes of, for instance, AIG. And that's basically in the event of a breach, they can go and claim for damages. Now, the insurers have also now cottoned on to the fact that it is very risky to provide cyber insurance. So very often they do have requirements of their customers in terms of minimum controls in place. And specifically around identity management, they're often very, very sticky around you need to have MFA, it needs to cover everything. So in certain regions, people actually buy us to ensure that, number one, they're able to get this insurance, and number two, to keep the premium lower. So not relevant in all regions, but certainly in South Africa, where we're based, we have one of the largest banks purchase Silverfort because their cyber insurance basically came back to them and said, unless you get visibility, you get MFA, you secure your identities, we're not going to renew your insurance. So if you have a challenge like that, you can also have a discussion with that. So this is basically what I wanted to share with you. So I'm going to repeat the three blind spots, the three problem areas, just so it's fresh in your mind, before I hand over to Offer that's going to take you through the architecture and demonstration. So the first one is people have MFA, but the MFA do not cover legacy systems. And we know those legacy type applications, things like PSExec and PowerShell, are favorite for bad actors or hackers. So we help you extend that MFA. The second one is around service accounts. We give you visibility. We map it automatically out of the box, and we have the ability to put a firewall around a service account to protect it, and Offer will demonstrate how we can quickly, within a couple of days, protect service accounts from exploitation. And then the last one that may or may not be relevant to you is if you're running PAM and you have a problem where people are bypassing your PAM, we can put a very simple firewall rule in place to prevent that kind of behavior. So with that, I am going to hand over to my colleague Offer, who will be taking you through the architecture in a short demo. And a reminder, if you have any questions, kindly pop them into the Q&A. After Offer's demonstration, we'll pick up any questions. Over to you, Offer. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Egbert, and thank you all for joining us today. As Egbert mentioned, we'll start with a quick architecture slide just to help you better understand how we fit into your environment. And from there, we're going to proceed into a live demo where we're going to show you all of the different capabilities that Egbert was walking through. I'll quickly start from the architecture slide, and we obviously want to show it to you being technical people to better understand how we fit. But the more important reason is that we truly can implement the solution and protect everything that Egbert just mentioned within a couple of days into a couple of weeks. And that goes a long way when we speak about identities, both on-premise and in the cloud. So I'll quickly get into the slide and we'll see exactly how we fit. We'll start quickly with understanding how does an authentication look like without Silverfort, right? So we have users or services, and whenever they're trying to make or to get access to a specific resource, we'll have an authentication request going to Active Directory. Now, as of today, Active Directory will inspect the credentials, the user and the password, and that is the only available token for authentication. So we're basically going through user and password validation in Active Directory, and assuming those are correct, the session will be established. Now, the experience with Silverfort is a little bit different. We're basically sitting behind your Active Directory, and we can become a second opinion. What it means from the client and the application perspective is that nothing changes, right? The applications, the resources will continue to authenticate to Active Directory as of today, but upon a successful authentication, we will then receive the authentication to Silverfort, and there's quite a lot of things that we can do with it. Now, whenever we are trying to make a decision in terms of remediation to a specific authentication, we first need to understand where is the authentication coming from, right? Egbert mentioned that if it's a human being, I can provide a second token of verification in the shape of an MFA, but for service account, MFA is not an option. And this is why the first thing that we understand is where is the authentication coming from, and then we can decide on the protection method. Now, there's 3 different groups of users typically. We'll quickly go through every one of them, and then in the demo, we'll jump a little bit further into the option. The first option is normal users, human beings without privilege access, trying to get access. The second group of users is privilege account, once again, human identities with extensive permission, typically being IT managers. And the third group of user is service account, those non-human identities. Now, how do we protect every one of those group of users? For normal users, we can extend your existing MFA to all those legacy applications that you couldn't protect today. Right, Egbert mentioned we do have our own MFA that you can see in the bottom, but to be honest, our preference is not to use it because most of the companies we speak with, they already have an existing MFA technology. They own it, they use it, the users is already used to be working with it, and that's perfectly fine because those are great MFA technologies. The only challenge with them is you cannot use them for your on-premise environment when working with Active Directory, and this is exactly the problem that we can solve. We can take whatever MFA technology you have in place, and we can allow you to extend it to everything that you have on premise. So all those command line interfaces that Egbert mentioned, we can apply MFA on top of those. Legacy application using Kerberos or even NTLM version 1, we can enforce and protect it. And basically any resource that authenticates to Active Directory, We'll go through a couple of examples using the most common MFAs technologies, but we truly support every MFA method that exists, whether it's even a custom MFA. The other option that we have is if you use conditional access within Entra ID, we can also allow you to extend your conditional access policies to everything that you have on-prem. So instead of having a single console in the cloud to only protect your cloud resources and a second one for your on-premise environment, we can provide a single console to manage all your identities across the board, being Microsoft conditional access, but we will allow you to extend the coverage of conditional access to on-premise resources as well. We'll get to that in just a couple of minutes in the demo. The second group of users, once again, human beings with extensive permission, and for those we can become an authentication firewall. And just like the name suggests, it's exactly what we do. We can apply firewall rules that will take place on top of the authentication. So what it basically means, in regardless of the permissions that one can have within Active Directory, we can still block specific activity if we identify a risk coming out of it. So for example, I can be an admin that technically speaking has all of the permission that I need in Active Directory to do everything. And then Silverfort will detect one specific authentication coming from a geolocation that we never saw before, or carrying any other risk indicator which seems to be suspicious. We can still apply blocking on top of those specific authentications to limit the risk and block in real time any suspicious activity into your crown jewels. And once again, I'll show you a couple of examples in the demo. The last groups of users, and probably the most dangerous one, is service accounts, those non-human identities. And for those, we consider them to be the most dangerous one because they carry extensive permission, but for the most part, they are not attached to a specific individual. They're attached to a specific application or into a specific resource if we're lucky, because just like we spoke before, we had Active Directory for so many years, and there's so much history involved that it's almost impossible to keep in track of every service account that we have. Now, for that, we provide two main things. We provide more than that, but the two main aspects when it comes to service account that I find to be the most challenging is the discovery part. How can we find and discover every service account that we have, whether it's being used extensively or whether it's a dormant account that just live within my environment and nobody's touching it. Once we discover it, we can apply the protection on top of it. Now, the concept is very, very simple. The discovery part, we do not go and actively scan your network, but instead, we're seeing all of the authentications coming from your domain controllers. So we're seeing all of the authentications, and we can build a profile for every user that is trying to access any resource. And when we build a profile, we're basically trying to understand what is the behavior of that specific account. Now, if you think about it, it's kind of easy if we look into the behavior profile of every account to understand whether it's a human being or is it a machine. For example, if I take myself as an example, I start my day every day in a different time, right? And I typically consume different applications on a daily basis. So it's enough to look on my authentications pattern to understand that I'm a human being and I'm not a machine, right? The protocols that I'm using, the applications that I'm accessing, the time that I'm connecting, and so forth. So for that, we will automatically know that this is a human identity. Machines tends to be a little bit more predictable, meaning they will connect on the same time every day. They will come from the same servers, they will go to the same servers, and they will use the same protocols. So it's enough for us to look at the account behavior for a couple of days in order to say, okay, this is a machine account, and this is exactly what is it being used for, And this is exactly the type of information that you can expect to get from Silverfort. It comes out of the box. We're seeing the authentication. It takes a couple of days, and we will start populating all of the service accounts that you have across the board. And that goes a long way, because I never met or spoke to a company that knew all about their service account. And this is one of the main problems that we can solve. Now, once we find those service accounts, and we typically talk about hundreds and for the most part, thousands of service accounts, there comes a question of how do I protect it? And how can I protect it in an efficient way that will scale to all of those thousands of service accounts without having to manually investigate and apply different protection to all of those accounts? And this is exactly what we do. We apply zero trust policies to the service account. And what it basically means that we will take and understand what is that account is being used for, right? Why did we create it to begin with? And then we're putting a virtual lock on top of it to basically make sure that that account cannot be used anywhere else. Okay, and I'll give you a couple of examples just to help you all connect the dots. Think about a service account that does backup for database servers, right? It starts on 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning every day. It goes from my backup servers into all of my databases. It performs the backup, and then it goes to sleep until the next day. What we're going to do for you is we're first of all going to discover that account and give you the full mapping of where is it being used, which sources, which destination, and which protocols. Now, once we finish building the baseline, meaning we fully understand the account behavior, we're switching the policy to on, and basically from that point of time, any attempt to use that account outside of what we have already discovered, we will flag it and block it in real time, which means that even if I will get a hold of the credentials of a specific service account, and I will try to use it somewhere else, we will automatically see it and we will automatically block it and make sure that no lateral movement is possible with any of those accounts that you have. And if you think about it, it goes a very long way, because you don't have to make any changes. You don't have to change the password. We're applying the most basic and important security that you can take for your service account. Understanding why did we create them to begin with, and making sure that they cannot be used anywhere else. And once again, we'll get into the demo in just a couple of minutes, and I'll show you how everything looks like within the platform. Now, for all of those different groups of users, assuming the authentication was successful, the only thing that we're going to do is to release the authentication back to Active Directory, and from Active Directory back to the end user. That basically makes us completely transparent to the users as well as to the application. And this is exactly how we can achieve a very, very quick implementation without proxies, without changes to the application, and definitely without changes to the user workflow. And once again, we do POCI running probably about 5 POCs a week. We can finish the installation within less than an hour and start enforcing everything that I just mentioned. So hopefully we'll get to that. Jumping into the demo, and once again, guys, if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A section. We'll get to it in the end of the demo. Now we'll start the demo from a quick demonstration of what will be the end user experience working with Silverfort. And for that, you can see a Windows machine on the left side, and on the right side, you can actually see my phone. And within my phone, I have all the most common MFA technologies that we see in the field, right? Okta, Microsoft Authenticator, Silverfort Ping, and Hyper. But as I mentioned, we basically support almost every MFA flavor. Now we're going to start going through different use cases and see exactly how it is that we can protect it. And we'll start from the most common use case that we see, which is probably the most common one for us to protect. And that's just a file share, right? This is a directory hosted on a different server, and I'm going to try to connect to it from my very own box. Now, keep in mind that without Silverfort, Windows will just take my cache credentials, authenticate it to AD, and grant me access into the remote file directory. Now, I'm going to show you what's going to happen when I click on it, and you're going to see the experience is a little bit different. We'll start with seeing that once I click on it, nothing really happens. It almost looks like my device is stuck. And instead, I'm starting to get MFA to pop up on my phone. And for the purpose of the example, I'll start first with the Microsoft MFA, go through the face detection and approve the MFA. And you'll notice that only once I approve the MFA on my Authenticator app, I was being granted with access into the remote server. Keep in mind that remote server do not have any agents installed on it. And matter of fact, it doesn't even know that Silverfort is in the loop, okay, which is extremely important to understand. It continued to authenticate the very same way it always did to Active Directory without knowing that there is a Silverfort box in the back that just enforced MFA. And once again, we used the Microsoft Authenticator MFA. Okay, so this is the most common example that we see. Another common example is if we think about a privilege account, trying to get access, for example, a database server. And in this example, I'm going to use a SQL database, and I'll try to connect to it using probably the most common client being the SQL Management Studio. And you're going to see the authentication is set up to Windows Authentication. And basically, we're going to go through the same experience. I'm going to try to connect. Nothing's going to happen on the box. And instead, I'll start getting different MFA prompts into my phone. This time, we'll use a different MFA technology, let's say Okta. I'll get into the Okta system, go through the MFA validation, and only once I approved it on the Okta, I'll be able to get access into the database server. Okay, and I'm not sure why this time the Okta didn't trigger the MFA, but we can see that all of the different MFAs were connecting to the system, and only once we approved it, we went through the MFA. Another quick example, which is something very common that we see, is RDP sessions. Once again, we'll go through trying to connect to the MFA. This time I'll use the Silverfort MFA, and only once I approve it, then the RDP session will be initiated, and I will be connected into the Windows box or the Windows server that I was trying to connect to. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the different examples, but just to kind of give you an example of what it looks like, we can do or apply MFA to remote file shares, RDP sessions, PSX connections using PuTTY to network devices, switches, routers, firewalls, PowerShell scripts, legacy application using Kerberos, or legacy application using NTLM. The concept will remain the same. As long as those resources will authenticate to Active Directory, we can apply MFA, and we can use your existing MFA technology to remediate or to respond to those specific MFA queries. Okay. With that, let me close my phone because we won't be needing my phone anymore. And we'll get into the console of Silverfort, and we'll go through the different configuration and the different policies that we have. Now we'll start from the main dashboard, and this is the landing page when we get into the product. And it really tells the story that Egbert and myself have explained in the last 30 or 40 minutes. We're starting from the different groups of users that can be available. Okay, and as we spoke before, we immediately understand how many users are currently connected and authenticating to the network, how many privilege accounts, and how many service accounts. Now, those numbers can be extracted from all of the different IDPs that you have connected to the system. Now, we spoke about Active Directory, but as you can see, we can really connect to every identity player that you have in place. And that could be Active Directory, ADFS, Radius, Entra-ID, if you have an hybrid environment on-premise or in the cloud, Okta Ping, and much more. The cool thing is that those white dots that you see flying around, those are live authentication going through the wire as we speak. And as you can see, once they make it to the Silverfort engine, one of three things can happen. If we didn't identify any risk, those white dots are going to go through the trusted path, which means that we approved and signed the authentication. However, if we need to verify specific identities, this is where we can enforce an MFA on top of it. And this is where I'm hoping we will see some of those white dots going up into the verify section. The reason why I'm saying I'm hoping for is because this is real-time authentications going through the wire, and we cannot control exactly when will an MFA be triggered. The other option is blocking, and this is exactly the authentication firewall capabilities, and we can see a couple of blocks that happened as we were speaking. And this is if we identify specific authentication coming with a risk indicator that should be blocked. This is exactly what we can do. And as you can see, some of those dots are going into the block section, which means that we saw and experienced a real-time blocking happen to some of those authentication. Okay. Other than that, because we see all of the authentication, we provide the visibility that a lot of companies are missing today. And you will be able to see it in the different parts of the UI, the different visibility aspect. I'll say that one of the most relevant and important parts of the visibility is what you see on the bottom right side of the screen. And this is the authentication distribution. So we're basically seeing all of the authentication, and we can tell you the distribution of the different authentication protocols. Now, why am I personally liking that page a lot? Is especially when we get into the weak authentication protocols discussion, and especially the NTLM and NTLM version 1 authentication protocol. You'll be surprised with how many companies we speak with that will tell Egbert and myself, listen, we don't have any NTLM traffic anymore. We went through a massive project, we mapped the dependencies, and we basically made sure that NTLM is no longer visible within our environment. And then we get into the POC part. We install the different components. We're starting to see the authentications coming to Silverfort, and that data is being populated automatically. And typically within minutes, we'll see NTLM traffic hitting or coming from their network. And there's always a big surprise about it because they thought they were able to eliminate it. And this, I think, really talks about the challenge that all of us have, which is the old weak authentication protocols, that we all still have them. Unfortunately, we all still use them, even though we know the risk is very, very big. And Silverfort can help you to understand exactly who is still using them, which users, which applications, and which resources, and to also allow you to protect it. We'll get to that in just a minute. Getting into the next page is the log page. And I think the name here is really, we're not doing a great favor for ourselves because this is not the Silverfort logs, but actually the authentication logs that we're getting from the system. And you can see that we can see every authentication that is coming from every resource that is connected to Silverfort. So for example, in this environment, I'm seeing all of my Active Directory authentications. I can use filtering with AI to say, show me all my authentications coming from Entra-ID, because we can also connect to your cloud environment and at the same time show you all of those authentications coming from the cloud. Now, Egbert spoke quickly about it before. The goal here is to show you all of the authentications that you have across the board, whether it's on Amazon, Microsoft, Okta, on-premise Active Directory, Radius, ADFS. We all have so many different identity management solutions. And if there's going to be an attack coming to the organization, it just makes it very hard to our security team to start investigating the logs within every system. right? Because the attacker is not just going to target my AD environment or just my cloud environment. They're typically going to try to get in from multiple sources into pretty much everywhere that they can get access to. And for us, the security team, to start fetching the logs from Microsoft and scanning them is an effort. And then going to Active Directory and pulling the logs, it takes a lot of time. And then trying to manually correlate it almost makes it impossible to do a proper investigation. And this is really why we created that page, because we can show you all of the authentications that you have coming from every resource. So for example, if I look for the authentication type, you can see it's coming from Radius, Ping, Okta, ADFS, Active Directory, and so much more. And we'll show you everything into a single UI where you can investigate anything that happened and to also see what was the response coming from Active Directory. So whether the authentication was successful, and if it didn't, to really understand what was the reason of the failure with full information to help your security teams to get the visibility that they're currently missing into their Active Directory. With that, we'll get into the policy section. And what I want to show you here is how simple it is to apply those different security policies and how fast can we do it to all of the different users that you have. So let's say that we started a POC today, we install Silverfort, and now we want to build a new policy that will protect all of my domain admins, right? I want to make sure that I'm first starting with my most dangerous assets, being my privilege account. And I want to make sure that I apply MFA whenever they're trying to connect to on-premise environment. So I'll create a new policy and call it protecting my domain admins. I'll keep the authentication type to be AD and any authentication protocol coming from there. When it comes to the users, because we sit on AD, we can query your security groups. So very easily, I can go and search for all of my domain admins and apply the policy only to those. For the purpose of the demo, I'll keep the source to any device. At the destination, I'll keep it once again to all of the domain computers. Okay. Now there's a challenge with MFA that you all know, that we do not want to trigger MFA too often, right? We don't want the end user to connect and use his phone 30 times a day to approve the different MFA. And this is why we build the policy angel to be granular enough for you to be able to apply it only to specific use cases. And this is exactly what you see on the table on the right side. This is probably the most important part of the policy, because you can choose to which use case specifically you want to apply the MFA based on the Kerberos SPN. And that allows you to narrow down the scope of the policy to only the relevant use cases. So for example, if I want to protect and enforce MFA on RDP sessions, I know that the Kerberos SPN will be term server. So I'll choose only that one. If I want to enforce it to remote file share, I can use the CIFS SPN. If it's legacy application, HTTP, and I think you guys understood the concept of it. We only need to understand what is the Kerberos SPN that specific authentication is using. And from that point of time, we will make sure that the policy will only get triggered if one of my domain admins is going to one of my domain computers using one of those specific connections in which I'm looking to protect, knowing that that's considered to be a dangerous path to my crown jewels. And this is exactly how we can set it up. The last thing that we need to do is to choose the action, allow, block, or MFA. And if we choose the MFA token, the MFA option, you only need to choose the token that you want to use. And as you can see, we have the Silverfort MFA, FIDO2 devices, OTP, Okta DU, RSA, Microsoft, Ping, all of the major players exist. And this is where we can trigger your existing MFA that you have in place. As simple as it looks, this is really what we do in a POC, and this is really how simple it is to enforce the most basic policy that talks about triggering MFA using your existing MFA technology to the on-premise use cases that you couldn't protect before. Okay. On top of that, we can apply more sophisticated security policies, which are based on risk. And you can see the policy type is currently set to static, but I can also set it to risk-based policies. And what you can do here, you can add another layer of security to the policies where you say only if we see those specific risk indicators, I want to start triggering the MFA. And if you go through the risk indicators list, you see that there's quite a lot of different options available, right? And all of those are different risk indicators that we know that can be very problematic and dangerous for the organization. But as I mentioned before, the most common one that we see our customers using is NTLM version 1 authentication. And this is exactly where you can build a policy to say any NTLM version 1 authentication that I'm seeing, I want to take an action. And I'll say that about 60-70% of our customers have a policy that says NTLM version 1 authentication anywhere. I don't care where is it coming from. I want to trigger an MFA because I know this is a weak authentication protocol. I do not trust it. And anyone who's still using it, I want to trigger an MFA because I need to validate the identity of that specific individual to make sure it's not an attacker or a compromised credentials. Okay. The remaining amount of customers that we have will block any NTLM version 1 authentication. And this is a more strict approach, but this is for the companies that told us we do not wish to see it, we do not trust it, we do not need to have it because we already went through the process of migrating all of our old legacy application into newer authentication protocols. And if anyone is still using it, block it. I want Silverfort to take the action and make sure that I don't have any NTLM version 1 authentication going through the wire. And this is exactly what we can do. And this is exactly how we can protect those old legacy authentication protocols. Other than that, there's also a lot of risk indicators related to geolocations, abnormal admin running with SPNs, credential scanning, failed authentication badge, impossible travel. All of them will, at the end of the day, will help you to fine-tune those policies and make sure that you fully protect your network. And our CSM team is always have the expertise to guide you and give you the recommendation about the most common and the most successful risk indicators that we have seen and we have used in the past. So this is another option. Once again, we just need to choose if we want to use a static policy or a risk-based policy. Both of them are very powerful and will help you to protect your network. With that, we'll jump into the second groups of users, being the service account. Now, because this is a different type of group, we have a different section within the product because we are going to take a different approach to our service account. Now, as we mentioned before, the first step is the discovery part. So if you were to install Silverfort today and come into the service account page, you will basically see nothing. There's not going to be any service account. But if you give the system a couple of hours and even a couple of days to establish the baseline, you should expect to see service account being populated to the screen. And as I mentioned before, we're detecting those service accounts based on the behavior, right? Because we see all of your authentications anywhere because of our architecture. So we're starting to automatically with zero configuration. You literally had to do nothing to map and build the baseline per user. And we're starting to detect all of the service account that we see. So for every account, you should expect to see the name, the dependencies, meaning where is it being used, which sources, which destination, and which protocols. Now, once we do that, we start going through a classification phase. Once again, we do it out of the box with zero configuration attached to it to help you understand what is that account doing. And as you can see, we have our classic machine-to-machine service account. This is the most common and what we intended to be when we create a service account to allow a machine to communicate with another one. We can also detect hybrid accounts, and those typically tells us that a specific account is being used both by machines, but also by human beings. And the goal is to give you the visibility so we can stop that bad behavior to make sure that it's not happening anymore. Service accounts should only be used by machines, and this is exactly the type of list that we can provide. We can also find scanners. This account is coming from 7 sources into a few hundred destinations. I just started a POC yesterday morning with a company where we looked and reviewed the different service accounts. And that's actually a bank in Tanzania. And we found a service account that is coming from a couple of sources into almost 1,000 different machines. Okay? And you'll be surprised because the end user didn't really know what it was. They needed to run some forensic and investigation to understand what it is. But this is something that will be extremely easy for us to pick up and find those specific accounts that being used from only a couple of sources to all of those different destinations. Now, a lot of the time is going to be security tools that just basically scanning the network, but we need to know about it and we need to make sure that we have full control of where they're accessing and who is using them. The last group of users being the dormant account, and those tend to be the most important one. And the reason I'm saying it is because dormant accounts exist. It's basically accounts that live within our Active Directory. They carry extensive permission, but nobody is using them. And I promise you all, we all have them, unfortunately. And the main reason is because Active Directory has been in the neighborhood for long enough, right? And we probably, every one of us, exchange a lot of IT managers within the company, and it's almost impossible to keep in track of all of them. And the other thing is that even if we find an account that we consider as the identity managers to be dormant, most of us do not have the courage or the confidence to just go and delete it because you don't know who is using it. You don't know if you're going to delete it and it's going to break an application or it's going to break a service or it's going to change something that we don't want to change. And that's why we all keep them in the system, and attackers know it, and attackers will go after the dormant account. And we will help you to find every one of those dormant accounts. We'll show you the list. You can see that for those accounts, 0 sources, 0 destination, 0 authentication. We know for a fact that nobody is using it, and that can give us the confidence to say, okay, this is a dormant account. Maybe I looked at it for over a course of a month. I'm seeing nobody's using it, and now I can go ahead and disable that account and delete it because I don't want to have any dormant account within my system. Huh? So this is the discovery part. Will help you once again to detect every service account that you have across the board. Now let's talk about the protection. How do we actually protect those service accounts and apply those zero trust policies that I mentioned before? I'm just gonna choose one of those service accounts, and we'll see that by default, we have a policy being attached to it. And the policy is very straightforward. We can see the sources in which that account is being used. We can see the destination, and we can see the authentication protocol. Now, keep in mind that data is being automatically populated. You do not have to feed it into the system. You do not have to do anything. We understand that this is a service account, and we tell you where is it being used. Now, once we make it to the point that we want to deny access, to block, to essentially apply the protection on top of that account, we can basically just choose the deny access and apply the policy. From that point of time, we're basically telling the system, any attempt to use that service account outside of what we have already discovered, I want to block it. Okay? And I'm taking you back to the example from before with the backup of the database servers. We'll tell you exactly who is using that account. And once we get to the protection part, we're basically telling the system, if someone is trying to use that account outside of what we have discovered and approved, we need to block it. And this goes a long way because we can stop lateral movement. It's enough for someone to even try to connect from a source that is listed in the policy into a destination that is listed in the policy, but trying to use a protocol in which we didn't see before, and we will block that activity. And that goes a long way because this is really how we can help you with almost zero maintenance to protect all of your service account. Now, once you actually set it up in production, you won't have to go and manually trigger every one of those policies because, as I mentioned, we all have thousands of them, and doing it one by one can take a little bit of time. And instead, what you can do is to create one smart policy, and this is what you see in the top of the screen. And that smart policy is basically a translation of what is my organization policy for service account and what is the approach that I want Silverfort to take. And that talks about service account that we already discovered, or even service account that we will discover next month if someone creates a new service account, right? Because the system is always studying a discovery. So we're basically telling the system, let me know after the baseline was established into a service account, and typically we will keep it for 7 days, which once again means Silverfort detects a new service account. We're starting to populate the baseline of where is that account being used, and we're telling the system, let the SOC team know about it. After 7 days, the baseline was established. The second part, when do you want to start blocking? And that typically, from my recommendation, will be 15 days. Some customers change it to 30. It entirely depends on you. But we're basically telling the system, once the baseline was established and we didn't find any new dependencies, after X amount of days, I want to start blocking those specific accounts and making sure that any attempt to use it anywhere else will once again be remediated and blocked. Obviously, we can apply exclusion to some of those accounts if needed. We can send a violation to your SIEM. We can pretty much integrate into your ecosystem, whether it's a ticketing system or your SIEM, to feed all of the different information that we have and make sure that we align to your security team. A couple of last things I want to say about the service account before we proceed. And it's more about how do we play along with spam solutions. And Egbert mentioned, that it's something that we see a lot, those spam solutions, and it's important to understand that we do not compete with them. It's the other way around. We have a very strong partnership with them because we can complement their solution. One of the things that a PAM solution will never be able to do is the discovery part. And this is exactly where you can use the discovery coming from Silverfort and feed it. As you can see, you can feed the PAM results into any PAM that you have in place to make sure your PAM implementation is successful and that you're not missing and not monitoring all of your service account. We will detect it for you and you can feed it into your PAM solution if needed. Another common use case that we see is if someone is trying to bypass the PAM implementation, right? I need to have a PAM solution because of compliance. I need to have the password rotation. I need to have the session monitoring for any access to privilege account. And basically a lot of the IT folks will be able to check out credentials from my PAM, but use it from a jump box or from a resource that is not being monitored by PAM. And the problem is that that account or that session is not going to be monitored by my PAM solution. And then I'm basically losing the functionality of my PAM implementation. What we can do, and if you ask me, I think this is the main reason that the PAM vendors really like working with us, we can set up a very basic policy to say any account that is protected by your PAM can only come from the PAM solution. So you're basically changing the policy to say the allowed sources is only the PAM solution. And if anyone is trying to connect from a jump box or from a different random server that we don't know about it, the authentication is going to come to us. We're going to see that it's not coming from the PAM solution and we can block it. And this is really, it goes a long way, because once you do that, you can rest assured that your PAM implementation is successful, you're monitoring every session, and there is no gaps, not for your IT managers or for any attacker to use those credentials from anywhere else, because we will strictly identify it. Those authentications will always come to AD, then to us, and we will block it. Okay, guys? Once again, if you have any questions about it, or if you want to have a further discussion about it, please leave the note in the Q&A section and we can address it in just a couple of minutes. One last thing I want to show you guys, and that's the insight section of Silverfort. Think about it as your Active Directory hygiene. This is part of the visibility that I mentioned before. And as you can see, we can divide it into 3 different sections: the inventory, the users and the passwords, and the servers and devices. And this is where we can show you things that are not necessarily being a risk to the organization as we speak, but is definitely something that your security team would like to address, because that can potentially become a problem. So you can see things like shadow admins, stale users, shared devices, admins running with SPNs. And for every one of those, if I click on it, I'll see what is a shadow admin, what does it actually mean, some mitigation and reference. But more important than anything, we'll tell you why did we consider it to be a shadow admin. So for example, that account, that SQL account that we see here, is not part of my security administrators, security groups, but it carries a lot of shadow admins. It carries a lot of privilege that it shouldn't have. And if I click on it, I can see exactly why did we consider it a shadow admin. So for example, that account has the permission of reset password to that application. It also has the permission of write all properties to that specific application, right? So we're giving you the full visibility. This is the model that's called ITDR, to really give you all the visibility that our security teams are currently missing when it comes to Active Directory. So that comes as part of the solution as well. And it's something that being done out of the box. Once again, guys, for all of those different capabilities, we just need to make sure that we're seeing your authentications and they're coming to Silverfort, and the data will automatically populate. There is almost zero configuration and maintenance from your perspective. Obviously, it's a technical solution, so there's always going to be small changes to exclude specific account or to enable specific path that should happen, because this is the way we do things within our organization. But for the most part, the system was built to help you protect all of your identities out of the box with almost zero maintenance from your perspective. And this is really what our management and the vision of the company is being made for. With that, I'll kind of stop here. We have a few more minutes to see if there's any questions from anyone that we can help you with.
We have 2 questions offered on the Q&A.
Oh, perfect. Let me just open it. Okay. How does the size of the organization affect the implementation of Silverfort? Basically, from an architecture perspective, we're only deployed on the domain controllers. Now, depending on where those sites reside, for example, we have customers with global presence, we will spin up those VMs as closer to the domain controllers as we can. So we just have to go through a sizing exercise to fully understand how you guys are deployed across the globe, and we are deploying the solution as closer to the domain controllers as we can. In terms of customer size, and Egbert, keep me honest here, we have customers with hundreds of sites and domain controllers and tens of thousands of users across the globe using our services today. So sizing or scalability is never a problem. We just have to go through a sizing exercise, and we can fully understand and provide a recommendation of how many virtual machines to deploy. Second question is, if the organization is fully on-prem, will that affect how Silverfort functions? Absolutely no. We are mostly aimed for on-premise environment. We can also support the cloud, but from our perspective, the only mandatory thing for us to be able to work is Active Directory. And if you have those, Karen, we can provide and secure your network. If you don't have an MFA technology currently because you're only on-prem, this is where you can leverage the Silverfort MFA, which comes out of charge. Okay, and it's important to understand. If you have an existing MFA, we'll leverage that. If you don't, you can always use the MFA coming from Silverfort. Next question, how will the discovery happen for a service account not using Active Directory? And this is a very good question. We mostly focus on the authentications that are coming for Active Directory. If something is authenticating locally, that can be a little bit of a challenge. We have ways to mitigate it, but we will have to better understand your environment. Okay, everything that I mentioned that comes out of the box will be to anything that authenticates to AD. If it's not, we'll probably suggest a way to mirror those authentications using Radius into Active Directory or into us directly, and then we will be able to protect those type of accounts as well. Next question coming from Victor. Does it allow just-in-time access for external user third party who are not part of the AD but need access to internal resources? The answer is very soon. The answer is going to be yes. We are working on a new model that will be called a PAS, Privileged Access Security, that will provide those JIT capabilities. When I say soon, it's already in beta. We already have customers using it and testing it. I think the official GA version for that specific model should be either next month or early next year or January. We've seen the product. We can show a demo of it if it's relevant, but it will provide exactly that. And that's a model that will be as part of everything that I mentioned. So it's not a different platform. Everything will be still under the umbrella that I showed you before, but it will provide JIT capabilities exactly for the use case that you mentioned, for privileged account security for your privileged account. Last question from Samuel. How do we protect the hash credentials for password write back between on-premise AD and Azure AD? That's a very good question. As for the time being, we do not look at the password and we do not even collect that information from your domain controller. This is exactly something that we intended to do because we do not wish to look at the password and the hashes as part of the security offering. We strictly focus on the authentications and the usage and the behavior of every account to make the decision. That being said, we are considering to start using the hashes exactly for the use case that you mentioned, but it's still something that our research team is currently investigating. But for the time being, we're not touching anything related to the password, and that's why we won't be able to do that. As for the time being, once again, it's something that we're currently looking at exactly because of the use case that you just mentioned.
Thank you very much, Ofer, and you're right on time. Thank you for that. And thank you for the questions. It's always nice to, talk specifically to your environment. So once again, I wanted to thank everybody for joining today, and I want to thank DataGroupIT for arranging this for us. So what do you do next? If anything we demonstrated or asked today is of interest of you, what will happen? DataGroupIT will forward a link to this recording. So you might want to share this with other individuals within your environment, as well as the presentation, and it will contain contact names. You are more than welcome then to reach out either to DataGroupIT or myself for follow-up discussions. And then something we do invite, or we're very keen to do for prospects, is run POVs. We're in the fortunate position that this is a very easy solution to install, to get up and running and to show value. So if any of you are interested in a POV, just get back to me. We will happily engage you and perform a POV in your environment. So with that, Sammy, I'm going to hand over to you for closing. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Egbert. Thank you, Offer. Nothing much to say. Expect an email from us just to give you the contacts and the recording of the webinar. Please share with your colleagues. Maybe if they're interested and they're not here, you can share the recording with them. And then we'd be happy to do follow-up meetings with you directly if this is something you feel you'd want in your organization. So thank you so much. And Diane, anything else before we close?
No, that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much,
Thank you,
and have
everyone.
a nice rest of the day. Bye.
Bye, guys. Bye-bye.